Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the January 31st meeting of the Advisory and Finance Committee for the Town of Plymouth. We are meeting in the Great Hall of the Town Hall of Plymouth, and I will go right to the roll call. Members, answer yes or no. Are you here? Ms. Butler?
Here.
Mr. Cabana? Mr. Cabana? Unmute. All right, I see you there. Okay. I'll come back to you. Mr. Dunn? Mr. Green? Here. Mr. Howard? Mr. Howard? Okay, it appears that way. Mr. Cabana, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Thank you. Well done, Mr. Hartman. Okay, Mr. Howard.
Good evening. I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Lally.
Here.
Mr. Lawler.
Here.
Mr. Pizarro.
Here.
Ms. Richards.
Here.
Ms. Tompkins.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
And Mr. Zuccaroli.
Here.
I'm also here.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn, thank you. Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. Okay. So this meeting is being conducted in a hybrid format, as you can see. Some of the participants are here in person, and some are on Zoom on the other side of the room. The meeting will be airing on Comcast 9, Verizon 47, or on PAC TV's YouTube channel, which can be viewed at pactv.org/stream. The ground rules here: any speaker giving public comment is allotted up to 5 minutes in which to speak. Public comment can be made at the beginning or at the end of the meeting, or in regard to a particular agenda item that the speaker wishes to be heard. Anyone who wants to attend the meeting virtually may do that, including members of the public who wish to give public comment can use one of the following methods if you choose to do so. The Zoom application. Download the Zoom app, use the meeting code 995-2986-0638, and then use the meeting code 100131. You can join through the website, www.zoom.us. Click Join a Meeting, and on the top right-hand side, enter the meeting code 995-2986-0638, and our meeting password is 100131, or via telephone, where we'll only be able to hear your voice. We will not be able to see your pretty face, on 929-205-6099, same meeting code 995-2986-0638, and enter meeting code 100131. Are there any questions so far? I'm only kidding. All right. Mr. Zuccaroli, you have a question.
I do. We can't see the room. For some reason, you're not being broadcast.
Okay.
All we see is the Plymouth government logo.
All right. Let me resolve that for you.
Concur.
That could be on my end. I don't think. All right, we're taking a commercial break here.
There you go.
All right. You have just been You have just been promoted to the IT department. Awesome. Well, thank you, Mr. Zuccaroli, for that comment. I thought you had a question on our instructions, so thank you.
No, I just couldn't see your pretty face.
Nope. Okay. All right, everyone's giddy today. Okay, so let's get on with the business. Review of town meeting articles coming before us today. Article 13, Promotion Fund. Article 14, amending a zoning bylaw, accessory dwelling unit. Article 15, expand historic district. Article 18, the MBTA communities, and that's not the subway system. I thought it was initially. Article 19, amend Chapter 90, Section E, historically significant buildings. And finishing up with Article 21, amend zoning bylaw, Section 207-11, ground-mounted solar photovoltaic systems. So we're going to start right off with Article 13, the Promotion Fund. Lee Hartman, Director of Planning and now IT Advisor to the Advisory Committee. You have the floor.
Thank you. So we have a full agenda here, so I will try to do some of these quickly. If there's things you want, certainly jump in, but we'll go right through them. So in 1992, the town of Plymouth had the foresight that something very few communities ever do, where they filed special legislation with the state. And I will point out that Judy Barrett, our consultant for the multifamily zoning at the end of the night, was actually here working for the town of Plymouth, and she helped actually draft this legislation. So thank you, Judy. So in 92, we had the foresight to go to the state and say, we want to promote our most important industry in the town, which is tourism, and we're going to take 45% of the hotel motel tax and set it aside in a special account, the promotion account, and set that aside to promote tourism in the town. So again, I think this is now the 21st year we've done this. It's an annual item on the agenda. This is just seeking authorization to spend this year's funds. So again, 45% of the hotel motel tax is put into it. The special act says 10% of that, a minimum of 10% of that money has to go to public improvements. The rest goes to supporting tourism. So if you look at the memo we gave you before you, so first of all, the great news is that that tax is up 6.9% from last year. Last year was a banner year, and this is above and beyond that. And I should point out that the other 55% goes into the general fund to support all the other things that the community does. So again, we have almost a 7% increase. There's a large portion of that money goes to See Plymouth, Destination Plymouth, if you're familiar with them. They are our partners in tourism, and they, run the visitor center on Water Street, and then the other one they do is promote the town of Plymouth through a whole range of different media sources through the town. We run a 3-year contract with them and competitively bid that every 3 years. And then there's a 10%, $133,000 that's set aside for public improvements. So this money is overseen by a group called the Visitors Services Board. They look at all the applications, all the requests for funds that come into the town, and they are the ones who will vote to allocate money to the various events or requests from town departments for public improvements. I would point out in pretty much every case, this represents for whether it's See Plymouth and our contract with them or with the various events that are before you, this money represents about 20% of the money they have, 25% of the money they have. The rest is raised either privately or through other grants. So not only do we have the foresight to set this money aside to promote Plymouth, but it's heavily leveraged by other sources of money, and matching 3 to 1 to 4 to 1 grants is what the VSB requires for people to do. And the final thing I'd point out is when you look at that total amount of money that's going into the promotion fund, which is $1,332,583. If you look at that and do the algebraic function, that represents $49 million that comes to the town of Plymouth just in rooms. So forget about the day trippers. We know that $50 million almost comes to this town just for the people who spend nights here and not even the day trippers. And then if you look and say, assume that that represents 20% of what you spend when you're here in Plymouth. The other 80% is going to the Plymouth Patuxent Museum, a whale watch, a fishing trip, dining out, shopping. We can comfortably say, just for the people who spend nights in Plymouth, that represents $246 million of money that comes to the town of Plymouth from tourism. And I always like to point out, too, that this money doesn't just go to the 1620 corporate, or go to, I'm trying to think who we have here, the Hilton, or go to the Best Western corporate. This money is money also for the local electricians, plumbers, accountants. So this money does more than just support the bigger businesses. We have a number of smaller hotels in the town. So again, I think we should be really congratulated for what we do as a community. It's a great way to support and promote our tourist industry, and again, it only represents a fraction of the money that's contributed to support it. And then I would just call your attention to the second page of my memo, and it gives you the different projects and different things that the VSB and the promotion fund supported last year. And again, I think that gives you a really good breadth of where that money goes, a mix between supporting town events, town public improvements, as well as the various events that I'm sure many of you attend in Plymouth. So with that, we would look forward to your support.
Yes, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Lee. I'm fascinated by those numbers about how much in tourism. Can you just tell me what the source is of that? Like when you say it's 246 million, I just want to understand a little bit.
Yeah, so what we're saying is, so if you look and you say that it's a 6% tax, doing the algebraic function, that represents about $49 million in when you go to get a hotel room and you're spending a night, you're 200 or 150 or 250 a night that you're paying. That's the 49 million. And again, then I took a leap, and from what I've seen in other places, you see a number between 20 and 25%. That represents about 20, 25% of what you actually spend when you're on vacation. So that other number comes when you say, okay, if it's 50 million that people are spending to just get a room, then your food, your other things, you assume that only represents about 20% of what you spend on vacation, then that's where that other number comes from.
Thank you.
Any follow-up for you, Mr. Young? Okay, I'll go to Ms. Richards, and then I'm going to go to Zoom. So, Ms. Richards, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I echo Mr. Young's sentiments. I do have a couple of questions on if any of this money is earmarked for other parts of Plymouth, Cedarville, Manomet.
It's open to anything in Plymouth. The biggest thing is it's got to be a nonprofit or a town agency or maybe some other governmental agency. But it's either the town or a nonprofit, but it's certainly open to any event, any request for funds in Cedarville, Manomet, West Plymouth, anywhere in Plymouth.
Okay, like the beautification.
Sure, and again, many cases,
so
if it's a beautification, it would be on town property. My recommendation is if you had an idea to talk to the DPW, and then they're very good about making requests for various funds. The VSB is very aware of the need to try to make that money available. So it wouldn't be just funds, say, to improve a recreation field. Somehow you have to show that money is actually going to encourage tourists to come to the town. But certainly if there's an event that might happen in another part of town, it's available for the whole town.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking more like, when people get off the highway, right, it's in Cedarville to direct them to various
Yes.
places. Yep. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Howard, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Hartman. Thank you for presenting. This is fabulous. Looking at page 2 of the document that you provided, it's clear that many of these, either individually or combined, are fairly sizable numbers. Is there an audit of the spend to make sure that the money is being spent appropriately?
Yes. So first of all, there's an application package, and we require them to detail how they're going to spend this money, what the money is going to be spent, and most importantly, what their local match, what their private match is. So we have a full application process that the VSB is right now in the process of collecting those, and will be in February looking to set aside, subject to town meeting approval, awards for those various things. In addition, not only do they review it in the beginning, we review every application when they're done. So they have to give us invoices, they have to give us bank statements, they have to give us evidence of how the money was actually spent and where that money went. And I will tell you, in many cases, the bulk of the money actually goes to the police, fire department, ambulance service to cover those events. That's some of the bigger items they have in a post 9/11 world that we live in. That's becoming more and more, the safety of our visitors and guests is becoming a bigger and bigger cost. But yes, we make them provide a full accounting before and after the event occurs.
Thank you.
Follow-up, Mr. Howard?
No follow-up.
Thank you. Mr. Cabana, I see your digital hand. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Hartman, for a nice success story. One question that I do have for you is, tourism isn't simply a 6-month summertime activity, and once this good weather ends and the toilet facilities at the State Pier, as well as the public restrooms in the visitor center get shut down, there aren't any public facilities for the tourists that tend to come into town. Is there any plans to address this? I mean, I think it's an area where we could definitely improve our presence.
And I think that's the one thing we hear, public bathrooms, public facilities like that, is probably the number one thing we hear out there about what the need is. To address that, we're talking about millions of dollars. That probably goes well beyond this. But certainly if we're able to, through our partners or through the DPW, look at expanding additional public bathroom facilities, this could be one of the sources that would settle that. We do make money available to keep the bathrooms at the Visitor Service Center down on Water Street open. And again, if there's a request for additional funds to help support, say, the bathrooms here at Town Hall or other locations, that's something that this money can go to and has gone to in the past.
Okay, but for most visitors would not know that there are public facilities in the town hall that are available, and those certainly aren't available, 24 hours a day. So I think that there needs to be some type of a plan put in place that addresses this need. Because I can tell you from personal experience, if you walk down on Water Street, in December, unless you want to go into a restaurant, there are no facilities that are available. So.
Okay. Mr. Cabana, any additional follow-up?
No. I'm supportive of the article, but I see a need, a public need that needs to be addressed in a better manner.
Okay, thank you for your input. Mr. Lally, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Hartman, is there a reserve in the promotion fund so that, to help you,
So
if we have a down year or
yeah.
something, you want to up the advertising to bring people back in, or how does that work?
From time to time, they can do that. My answer always is, it's raining now. And so, everybody says, should we have a rainy day account? I think it's rainy this year. I think we have an obligation to invest all that money as we can. But certainly we can, and from time to time, they do keep money aside. But there's no necessarily built-in reserve account that we have. We try to use that money each year to invest it back in the community.
So essentially, the promotion fund itself, which then funds your operating budget, is nominally zero at some point every year?
Yeah, we always have something, and there's always one or two events that get canceled, or maybe there's a request for public improvements that don't occur. So the money always comes back, but certainly not on the magnitude of any more than $10,000 or $12,000.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, I do have a question for you, Mr. Hartman. On your memo, it says public improvements at $133,258, which is 10% of the budget as required by the Home Rule petition. Can you describe some of those improvements?
Sure. So when we do the Christmas, can't say that anymore, the holiday decorations on Main Street, North Plymouth, those funds all come from that. The plantings that you see, hanging plants and the watering that comes from there. Trying to think of what else we have. Some of the stuff for the events we have during the holidays on down here. Trash bins, recycling centers, $100,000 was given to do improvements to the Visitor Services Board through the town. Adirondack chairs that you see that the public arts are painted. Event boards that are around the town that show the various events that are occurring. So those are some of the examples. Recently, we gave some money for the improvements that are going on to the rail trail, too. That would be another example. So, yes. And I would point out that 10% is a minimum, not a maximum. So it's a minimum, and we, the VSB, can certainly go over that if there's something worthy.
Excellent. Thank you. I see no additional questions. Do I have a motion? Mr. Lally, would you like to make a motion? And a second? Ms. Butler, we have a second. The motion is on the table to approve Article 13, and we'll go through the roll call. Well, actually, we'll go to discussion first. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing no discussion. Ms. Butler, how do you vote on Article 13?
Yes.
Mr. Cabana?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
And Mr. Superoli.
Yes.
And so the Advisory and Finance Committee unanimously recommends passage of Article 13.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. Okay, Article 14 is to amend the zoning bylaw accessory dwelling unit, ADUs, and I'm going to call again on Mr. Hartman, the Director of Planning for the Town of Plymouth.
Thank you. There are a couple of the people who probably want to speak on this too. So
Please.
This is accessory dwelling units. So this would be a dwelling unit on someone's property that's accessory. I point out that this use and this land use or this type of living arrangement is identified in our master plan and identified in the previous and the most recently approved housing production plan we have for the town. The Affordable Housing Trust, and we do have the chair here from the trust, also has voted to support this article to move forward. I would also point out, and I will note that the Finance Committee has changed quite a bit, but I will note that in fall town meeting of 2019, this narrowly failed at town meeting by I think about 4 votes. And in the fall, when this similar article was presented, it was supported unanimously by the Planning Board and the Select Board, and there was a 9-2 vote by the Finance Committee. It came back a second time in 2021, again, unanimous vote by the Planning Board, the Select Board, and a 12-0 vote by the Finance and Advisory and Finance Committee. So the big change that's happened in this one now is that we've removed, there were some special permit criteria in here just to give some flexibility for those things that might be a little unusual. That required a 2/3 vote. So we've removed that, and now this is strictly an allowed use, so the vote quantum for town meeting is a majority vote. And again, this allows for one accessory dwelling unit on a property. Property has to be owner occupied, so this can't be 2 rentals. You can't use it for short-term rental either. Some people are concerned about the impact on the community. I would point out that we have, as near as we can figure, well over 540 what we call in-law apartments or family suites already in this town. The only difference between those, and they will continue to be allowed in this town, but the only difference between an in-law apartment and accessory dwelling are really 2 things. One is an in-law apartment could be as large as 1,200 square feet. The maximum size this bylaw is proposing for an accessory dwelling is 900, so it's smaller. And the second thing is if you have an in-law apartment, it has to have a shared entrance with the main use. This does not require it. It could be a separate distinct unit, or it could be a separate structure, say a carriage house or some other second unit. So again, we hear time and time again the need to create something that's a little more affordable, something that either older people can stay on their property and live in as they allow maybe a family member to move into the larger house, or just something else for a slightly more affordable arrangement for people in the town of Plymouth. So again, we hope you approve this. It's third time. We're hoping it's a charm. I'll see if Vice Chairman Steve Bolton, Planning Board.
Good evening, members of the Advisory and Finance Committee. Again, Steve Bulletin, Vice Chair, Planning Board. Often when I stand before you, I'm spouting statistics or talking about statutes, giving a lot of detail. This is not one of those issues. This is an issue that really becomes a lot more personal to the residents. Mr. Hartman mentioned that this type of unit, this accessory dwelling unit, has certain uses. What we've heard in going through this as part of the planning board process and other groups is how diverse the need is for these types of units. Before the planning board, we heard from people who were parents who were looking for this type of a unit so a child of theirs can come back and stay in Plymouth. People who had young children, that's younger children, younger professionals who couldn't afford the high rents which Plymouth is now generating because we are such a popular place to live. Seniors who are looking for an opportunity to stay in their community, but maintaining a large house, very often with a second floor bedroom rather than a first floor space, becomes untenable. This gives them an opportunity. Most recently, I was just reading today, earlier, about some other communities that did this to see what else they found. And I noted that, for example, Brewster allowed ADUs as of 2021. And they just, on this past year in 2023, made their ADU bylaw more expansive because what they discovered was they don't have enough of them, and they make absolutely wonderful seasonal worker housing. Something that we certainly have an issue with as well. So this is an opportunity for Plymouth to just create one more type of housing, one more option, and it's not going to be a massive proliferation. People keep wondering, Mr. Hartman mentioned, people are concerned about, oh my God, what's going to happen with these? It's still a challenging thing to do. As Mr. Hartman will note, all of the other zoning still applies. You still have to meet all of the setback requirements, all of the side yard requirements, all of the parking requirements, all of the septic requirements. Nothing else can be allowed. No special permit can be allowed for this to be done as a matter of right. It just simply doesn't apply. So you're not going to see one of these popping up in every backyard, in every area. That's what other towns have found. They said, gee, we actually want more of these. We were planning for X number of them, and we're not getting enough of them. We have the need. They provide a benefit. Hopefully Plymouth will see it that way as well. Thank you very much, and of course I'm available to answer questions as well.
Okay. Mr. Green, the floor is yours.
Sure. Just two quick questions on this. Do you know what the approximate lot size would be to even fit one of these 900 square foot units?
So our minimum lot size for villages areas is 20,000 square feet, 60,000 in the rural parts of town. Again, the biggest thing is you have to meet the setback requirements too. So it would be, whatever this is, has to be the same setback. So if you have, so let's say you have a house on a small 10,000 square foot lot, and you want to add on to your house, that would be 20 front yard, 10 sides, 10 rear. Let's say on that same property you want to do it as a separate structure, 30 rear, 40 front, 15 sides as a separate structure. So the setbacks are the same as if it was a garage, a separate detached garage, or the same as if it was an addition to the house.
you put that in acres for me just to?
So 20,000 square feet is they call it a builder's acre, 40,000, so it's roughly half an acre. And 60,000 is roughly an acre and a half.
Okay, great. The other question was just on the language, and you mentioned in the preamble about restrictions on short-term rentals. I know there's obviously a part of the law that's intended to stop that. But I was just curious if this is intended to be a, policy that we're trying to not have short-term rentals, or if there's some sort of enforcement angle to this.
So I think the big concern with the short-term rentals is that those are people on vacation. This can be in any neighborhood, anywhere. So I think the concern we've heard is people would like to have that type of use of a building limited. So it's really because that's a vacationer coming here for a few days. I know in my neighborhood, it does create some problems from time to time.
Sure.
So it was more about quality of life for the neighbors to say you can't do that. Enforcement, I won't lie that if somebody starts doing that and violates the law, it does become a challenge. I will tell you from my experience with all of these, 98% of the people abide by the law. That 2% could be a challenge, but we do have a range of legal remedies to pursue them if they are violating the bylaw.
If I can also just add, one of the reasons that we put that restriction in, and that's actually part of the model restrictions as well from the state, is that the goal is not to encourage more vacation housing, but rather to encourage the type of housing that we're really lacking, that being longer term. I hate using the word affordable because it's such a less expensive because it is smaller in size housing that is available to people who want to stay in our community as residents rather than just visitors. It's not that we're discouraging visitors, but we're rather trying to encourage residents.
Great. One last question, and just to clarify, is there any actual restriction that says there needs to be some sort of rental agreement to make this happen, or is it if you had your parents come live there and sign a lease with them?
No, we don't. There's no restriction on them. We don't get involved in that public transaction. And I would also point out that Vice Chairman Bulletin referenced some examples. I know several people with older children in their basement, and many people who just say, I want that child out of my basement. So another example of that is you have somebody who's 20 plus years old living in the basement and looking for an arrangement to have some privacy.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Again, just so we specifically did not include, I actually know, for example, Yarmouth did include originally a lease requirement. It actually had a 12-month lease requirement. They have since dropped that because it did create some confusion. They were getting a lot of leases filed with zero money because it was a family member, et cetera. They have now dropped that, both because they don't want that long-term requirement. They do want to be able to make it available for seasonal workers, and also just because they wanted to make it clear that family members should be encouraged. It's one of the things that we want to do is we want to promote intergenerational change in housing within the community.
Any follow-up, Mr. Green?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Cabana. You've been patiently waiting. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that this is just a marvelous idea, and I'll be supporting it. One question for Mr. Hartman or Mr. Bulletin. I'm assuming that if a property under which an ADU could be placed is in a flood zone, the FEMA requirements would be also applicable?
Yes, it would, and actually probably would require a special permit for that flood zone also. So it might have additional review, but yes, this does not exempt you from any of those other requirements.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Very good. Yes, Mr. Young, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm interested in the research you've done so far with other towns that have passed it, and how many units have been built in those towns, if you have anything.
It's hard to get a lot of detail from
Okay.
the towns. I pulled a list of towns that have it. There are about 40 of them.
Okay.
For example, in the on the Cape Cod area, we have Brewster, Chatham, Dennis, Eastham, Harwich, Orleans, Mashpee, Provincetown, Sandwich, Wellfleet, and Yarmouth. So they have various, some of them have done ADUs solely as truly affordable housing. It has to be deeded affordable.
Yeah.
Some have done it as of right. Some have done it mixed, some as of right, some special permit. One town did it where it was as of right in certain areas and special permit in other areas. And as I mentioned, several of these towns which have done this originally have now changed their bylaws to become more expansive. I can only say that from what I've seen, it's the numbers are in the dozens, not in the hundreds. And from what I was reading from one of the realtor websites that was talking about ADUs, the problem that they face is that as soon as one of these becomes available for rental, it disappears. The typical inventory is zero. So they're actively encouraging more growth of ADUs because the demand far outstrips the supply, because we really don't see a lot of these. And again, as Mr. Hartman mentioned, because you do have to meet all of the zoning requirements, all of the other requirements associated, parking requirements, these are not inexpensive things to do. This is not throwing up a shed in your backyard. This is, you've got to go through the whole building process, the permit process. So this is not something that anyone and everyone can do, which is why it is by no means the panacea for all of our housing problems, merely just one further option that we can give as a gateway to help some of our community that really needs it.
And just a quick follow-up.
Yes.
Any of those towns that you contacted, did anybody say, oh, man, don't do this. This is a bad idea?
No.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Pizarro, the floor is yours.
Thank you, through the chair. Good evening, Mr. Bulletin and Mr. Hartman. Thank you for this presentation. I have two questions. One, and I like to visualize the practice of this zoning bylaw. So let me go through a hypothetical. Say a resident, an owner, has a single family dwelling with a lower level with an entry. Would that be considered, and they fix it with a, you know, what would it say here, cooking and a bathroom and all of those things, would that be considered an ADU?
Yes, I would just point out to do something in a basement because of safety and access is a challenge, but certainly if you could have a separate lower unit that's separate and complies with all building code, yes.
Okay. And then second question, does a owner have to register ADUs with the town?
No, they do not. So this requires that this is owner occupied. So
Okay, right.
you're not allowed to rent both of those properties. Again, it would be very hard to enforce that, but it requires owner occupied. And I would say that the time that that always gets caught is on a sale.
Right.
So
Okay. So just another follow-up. When you said separate, meaning you can't go from the basement to the upper level or the lower level to the upper level?
Well, I wouldn't say you can't go. I mean, that would be the personal decision of the property owner. I think if you wanted to have something that you had access to the two, my recommendation would use the existing bylaw for an in-law apartment. If you wanted to separate the one, then I would use this bylaw. So I think that's really personal choice and making sure it complies with code.
No further question. Thank you, Mr. Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Pizarro. We have a question from Ms. Richards. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So my first question is related to inspectional services. So I would expect that this is going to place a rather large burden on inspectional services.
No. Again, as Mr. Bulletin pointed out, I will be surprised if we see more than 12 of these a year, in addition to the tens of thousands of permits they already issue. In addition, we already have this essentially in place now with the family suite. So no, and the building commissioner has seen this. He's familiar with it. He has no objection to it.
Okay. And I had another question that left me. I will leave it at that, but I do support this, I think. Oh, and no, just another comment. We refer to them as cellar dwellers. Just an FYI. I have a cellar dweller, but he lives upstairs.
Well, it could be your parents, too.
Exactly, yeah. Right.
In my
Thank you.
case, we had our parents living in the cellar. It's flipped. Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Hartman or Mr. Bulletin? Can I entertain a motion? Ms. Tompkins?
Yep, if we could.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Kathy Dunn. I'm the current chair of the Affordable Housing Trust and a town meeting member from Precinct 4. I guess we've addressed clearly that we have a housing crisis in Massachusetts and in Plymouth. People who grow up here cannot afford to live here. People who work here can't afford to live here. I mean, even within town government, people live miles, towns and towns away in order to work here. The Plymouth Affordable Housing Trust assists in identifying housing needs and housing opportunities for all income levels, while at the same time preserving the town's character. That's extremely important. People need places to live where they can afford, that they aren't paying more than 30% of their income to live there. Many people in Plymouth who rent, more than half, pay more than 50% of their income, and then have all their other expenses. And there's a large portion of the town that's rent burdened like that. Accessory dwelling units are the right thing to do right now, because they're, as the two gentlemen before me have said, they're another form of housing for families. Homeowners can expand their home to build a one-bedroom, year-round dwelling, either attached to their home or separate on their property. This could house a parent, a disabled child who would like a little more independence, a young family member who's saving to build a home or buy a home, and other individuals with significant housing needs. So the way I see it, it serves two purposes. ADUs are a way to provide needed workforce housing in a less expensive way than market rate construction. It will not require the state or the town to spend money and will be creating housing. At the same time, homeowners who are cost burdened, and we've done studies that show we have people in Plymouth, older people in Plymouth who are cost burdened, some of them may find a way to increase the value of their property and have rental income so they can stay in their homes. So the Affordable Housing Trust, as Lee mentioned, voted by 6 out of 7 members who were in attendance in support of the accessory dwelling units. And we urge the community to support this initiative this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. What was the opposing vote?
I'm sorry.
What was the opposing vote? You said it was 6 out of 7 approved. What was the opposition? No?
What was it? It was a person who felt that it might lead to controversies with neighbors.
Okay.
I think that was his objective. I'm sorry? I don't recall.
Okay, thank you so much for your...
Yes.
Very good. Okay, that's all I
Yes.
have for you.
Any
Okay.
other question?
Yes. Would you like to ask a question of Ms.
Did you have a
Dunn?
question? No. Thank you.
Okay, so we are in discussion now. We had a motion.
I said I know the question. I wanted to ask a question.
I know, I know. And I'm saying that we're in discussion right now, so you may ask a question.
Okay, I'm not sure who would answer this. It may be Mr. Hartman, I'm not sure. Will the properties be reassessed?
Yes, and I did try to get a number from Ann Dunn, the town assessor, to see what that might be, and she said it was very, very hard to do that. But again, yes, it will, and there will be an increase in their taxes and the taxes paid to the town.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, we're not in discussion because we never did get a first and second. So I went to Ms. Tompkins for a first, and then would Mr. Young like to second the motion? Yeah.
I move the motion.
Thank you. All right.
I second it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much for your cooperation. So now we're in discussion. Yes, Mr. Green.
I would just like to say that I love this. This is great. This is great for the town. When my family first moved here, Plymouth was the only place in the South Shore that we could even afford to live. And if I step back or kind of bring that forward and I'm looking now, those numbers are multiplied by 2. It's crazy out there. We need all the housing we can get, and I love this. So I will be voting yes, and I urge everybody else to.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Any other discussion before we go to the vote? Hearing and seeing none, we are voting on Article 14, amend the zoning bylaw for accessory dwelling unit. Ms. Butler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Cabana?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
And Mr. Zubaroli?
Yes.
The Advisory and Finance Committee, by unanimous vote, recommends passage of Article 14, amend the zoning bylaw. Thank you so much to Mr. Hartman and Mr. Bulletin for your presentation, and for Ms. Dunn for your comments. Okay, moving on to Article 15, to expand the historic district. I believe Mike Tubin is in the audience or here. Okay, so please identify yourself.
Hello, I'm Ann Mason, Vice Chair of the Historic District Commission, and presenting our proposal for expanding the existing historic district for the Commission tonight. Historic districts in Massachusetts offer protection to significant structures, to historic landscapes, protection from demolition and from inappropriate alteration. And so the purpose of the historic district is not to freeze a neighborhood or a community in time to keep it locked into one historical moment, but to actually allow for thoughtful growth, thoughtful change, compatible development that does not sacrifice the nature of the neighborhood or the area that's designated, which makes it unique. The over 120 cities and towns in Massachusetts have historic districts. Plymouth first established a historic district in 1973. It has since been expanded 3 times. And one important thing to note is that our historic district is relatively small. It's just covering really the heart of the downtown and waterfront area. Other areas of town have very little protection against inappropriate alteration or demolition or incompatible development. You may ask, don't we have a demolition delay bylaw, which I know is something that many of you, probably all of you, are familiar with, and we do have that bylaw. But that is a delay. It's not a permanent prevention of demolition by any means. So we have had success with the demolition delay bylaw, where we've been able to prevent historic structures from being demolished and have found other ways of preserving them. But there have also been occasions where that demolition delay, which is only up to 12 months, has run out and historic structures have been lost. Most recently, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are aware of the discussion surrounding the Plymouth Foundry building on Water Street, which is now Safe Harbors Marina. The Historic District Commission did place a demolition delay on this property, which has now run out, but through that year that there was an opportunity to talk about options for preserving it, and there was an incredible grassroots effort. Many of the neighbors, other community members got involved to try to save and collaboratively and creatively create another future for this building. Although those conversations have now ended, it really did bring a great deal of attention to the part of the waterfront that's adjacent to the Foundry building, adjacent to the existing historic district. And that's why we're here tonight and thinking about expanding into that area. So just to, again, give you a quick overview, the current district stretches from just about slightly north of Samoset Street all the way slightly south of Water Street, and then, a corridor west of the Main Street, Court Street corridor. So again, a fairly small area, considering how large Plymouth is, how many other neighborhoods and villages there are throughout the town that have historic structures and landscapes within them. The proposed expansion is very small. It's only 59 properties just in the area adjacent, sort of southeast of the existing boundary of the historic district. And so this is the area that we're discussing tonight. It covers Union Street, part of Lincoln Street, and Bradford Street. And Bradford Street really is at the heart of this expansion. It's a remarkably intact 19th century neighborhood. It's downtown, so obviously it has a lot of potential. You could even say that it's at risk for incompatible development as the downtown continues to be developed and in different ways. But it is really one of the few intact working class neighborhoods that we have that remains. It's remarkable here in Plymouth. Some of the workers' cottages that are here, they're very small for working class individuals who worked in Plymouth's industries, whether it was fishing or shipping, other factories like the Foundry that were on the waterfront. And it also provides a connection to some of our earliest immigrant communities who were coming in and working in some of these industries as well. I like to think of it as some of the challenge we have in Plymouth, of course, is escaping this pilgrim narrative where the focus is on 1620 and Plymouth Rock. Not that we want to forget that period, but really to think of Plymouth as having a 400 years of history, over 400 years of history. And so expanding the historic district here really does protect an important part of our 19th century history. On Lincoln Street, the expanded district would also include two municipal buildings, what is now Nathaniel Morton Elementary School, and then across the street, the former Plymouth High School, then the Town Hall, and now the school's administrative building. I mentioned that we are looking at Bradford Street, sort of the heart of this expansion of the district. That is actually part of a federally designated district called the Bradford Union Street Historic District, which was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1983. That just gave it an honorary designation, a distinction, federal recognition of its significance in terms of architecture, commerce, industry, and then archaeology and history itself. But I think there is a misconception that this idea that if your property is on the National Register, then it's protected from demolition or from alteration, and that's unfortunately not the case. Again, it's mostly an honorary distinction. You're not necessarily guaranteed protection from alteration or demolition. And so that's where the local historic district really comes into play and can help preserve these neighborhoods. Just to briefly provide an overview of how we went about, how the Historic District Commission went about this, discussing this proposed expansion. It was very much a public process where we sought input from the local residents and community members. All property owners in the proposed district were notified. We had multiple public forums, and then we had a formal hearing where we, again, at the forums and at the hearing, we invited the public to come to share their concerns or to express their support. At the beginning of this process, we also sent out a survey to residents to get a sense of what they were thinking and how they were understanding this expansion. And we did have a professional consultant who worked with us. He actually did a study. The Massachusetts Historical Society requires that a study be done of any proposed historic district. And so he completed this study for us, and he came to some of the public hearings to, again, provide information and speak with the residents. His study is actually available on the Historic District Commission's page on the town's website, so if you're interested, you can find it there, or I'm sure Mr. Hartman could provide you with copies as well. But again, unlike that demolition delay bylaw, unlike the National Register of Historic Places, it's the local historic districts that really do provide the most effective protection for our historic properties and neighborhoods. Establishment or expansion of the district will require a 2/3 vote at town meeting. It was a public process to get to this point. We also try to make it as much as possible a community-based review in which, again, it's the property abutters, neighbors are notified when a project is proposed and coming before us. So if they have concerns about it, they can come and they can hear the proposal from the property owner and be part of that process as well. We do have published guidelines, which then, obviously impact how we make decisions about each property proposal. But it really is done on a case-by-case basis because every property is unique. Every landscape, every streetscape, every neighborhood in Plymouth, in our district, is unique. And so it's not, again, about trying to force everybody to come back to some kind of historic point in time, but to make sure that anything that is happening in the district is compatible with what's already there and nothing is being lost in the process of, moving into the future. So I don't want to go into this in great detail, only because I know time is precious tonight. But just in terms of what actually is triggered by review, the guidelines only apply to physical changes to the exterior of a building visible from a public way. So that includes a lot of things because there are a lot of things on the exterior of a property. But what is not triggered would be any changes to the interior of the property, anything that's not visible from a public way, routine maintenance, emergency repairs, and replacement of like for like, because if, again, we're not going to force everyone who has an asphalt shingle roof to suddenly switch to red cedar shingles. That's not what we're doing here. But we're trying to maintain the appearance of the district that is compatible with its historic character. There are 3 certificates that property owners can apply for, and through Mr. Hartman's office. And then the town staff works with the applicant to schedule a hearing if necessary. And then the Historic District Commission meets twice a month to review. We have both informal and formal hearings, so we encourage people to have as many informal hearings or discussions as they need to with the commission to get their project to the point where it will pass at a formal hearing. And again, we do try to work collaboratively with the applicants so that they understand the guidelines and so that we understand their project and, we're not in any ways, stopped from letting them proceed. The expansion survey was done in September 2023. So again, this is, I think, a testimony to the hard work that was done by the Bradford Area Commission, which was that group of local residents and neighbors who, because of what was happening with the marina, raised awareness of the history in this particular part of the downtown. And we do have here the first question: do you think the Bradford Union Lincoln Street area is historically significant? And of the respondents, 12 said yes and 5 said no. And I think, again, there was a clear understanding going into this discussion of expanding the district into this area that most people saw the area as historic. Where we, I think we did see that not everyone agreed with expanding the district into their neighborhood. That's where you have that 6-6 split of the respondents to that question. But what we tried to do, because then we followed this survey with those public meetings and hearings, we tried to allow our residents the opportunity to express their questions about what would it actually mean to be in the historic district, what is the process like, and then I think we were able to resolve many of those questions just in those meetings. And then there were other questions that came up again about what about some of the big properties in this proposed area, like the municipal buildings, the town-owned properties. How would that, what would the relationship be between those properties and these smaller properties? And so there were a lot of questions that came out that I think were very helpful in understanding how people were thinking about the district itself. And we do, of course, understand, I think, with any regulation, so obviously we have zoning bylaws, we have building codes that everyone has to comply with and deal with. But this would be a new imposition, new restrictions on 59 properties, so that you have to ask, do the benefits outweigh the imposition of those new restrictions? And so we encourage property owners to think about this, think about the benefits that come from the protection of their neighborhood. So it's not just about Plymouth having a historic neighborhood that is, again, has some protection on it. But even just for the people who live on the same street together, they know that their neighborhood is more or less stable. There's stability there. They don't have to worry about buildings being torn down and something large overshadowing them next door. It encourages sort of the pride in the neighborhood, the peace of mind that this historic past is being preserved in such a way that makes it a nice place to live. In many recent studies, actually property values for properties within historic districts have increased. And so that's something that we would probably expect to see here in Plymouth as well. But I would just emphasize again that we're trying to protect in a thoughtful way historic structures, historic landscapes from being demolished or from being altered in such a way that they lose their historic character. And the purpose, it really is to benefit the community, to benefit the neighborhood, so that we can, we can maintain what's unique to Plymouth and what's unique to this section of Plymouth in particular. So I'm happy to answer questions. Mr. Hartman's here, Mr. Tubin's here as well. So.
Okay, Mr. Howard, I saw your digital hand. The floor is yours.
Great presentation, nicely done. In the event of a colossal, a complete loss due to flood or fire, is it assumed that it would be a like-for-like reconstruction?
No, so like for like is really to the benefit of the property owner, right? So if you have something that is already one material, if you're replacing it or repairing it, you use the same material and it's not going to create an issue. But in the case of a total loss of a building, the new building would fall under the district's guidelines. So you would have to, you would have to bring your proposal before the commission to be approved, but it wouldn't, it's not a case where you would be expected to reconstruct something that, I think I don't know if that's ever happened.
No.
That you. Oh, it did.
Yeah, and it would point out that it's not like we used to call it, or we do call it, creating Disney in Plymouth. So if a house burnt down or a house was demolished, the goal is not to recreate something that mimics what was there. It's to make sure that whatever the addition is complements the district. So it wouldn't be like we want you to put back white cedar shingles and all this, but we just want to make sure that whatever your new construction is complements and doesn't detract from the district. But it wouldn't be creating Disney and trying to recreate something that was there that doesn't exist anymore.
No follow-up, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Butler, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. Were you concerned about the number of people that responded to your question there?
To the survey?
The survey, yes.
I think actually a 43% return rate on a survey is pretty good.
That's good. Okay.
Which, I know it sounds pretty low. And I think I don't know how many people we actually had come out to the hearings. Yeah, right. So we had good turnout. I think there were certainly a lot of people who were right away supportive, who came out to the meetings and expressed that support. Again, there were residents who had concerns, and I'm sure that some of them still have concerns. But overall, we didn't see it's not like we had a lot of people who didn't fill out the survey and then showed up at the meeting and were, very upset at this proposal. That was not the tenor of what we encountered at all.
Okay, because you did have 12 people that were concerned. So at the meeting, that concern wasn't overwhelming, or?
I think there's concern.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to minimize that. But again, I think through the public outreach, they were aware that we were going through this process. You don't see a huge turnout. But I wouldn't minimize that there are some people who are concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Richards, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Would you mind going back to the map?
Sure.
And my question is, so you're including the old town hall. Does that also include all of Lincoln Street on that side?
No.
So just the town hall, not those residents?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, gotcha, okay. So my other question is, does designating an area as historical, does that affect the tax rate at all? So you haven't found it fluctuates either way?
No, I mean, there are some studies that do show that it does improve your property value in the long run because you have a nicer looking neighborhood, an area that's maybe more desirable to live. So you might have in a sub-district a slightly elevated tax, but not anything that I would think, it's not like it would increase or decrease by some significant amount.
And do you have plans in the future of another expansion?
I think what we, as a commission, we feel that this is our first step, and I don't know if our chairman, Mr. Tubin, wants to respond to this, but we're really interested to see how this does on town meeting floor. A two-thirds vote is a high bar, as you all know. And so, again, I think we feel that this was sort of the right first step to take in terms of expanding the district because of what happened with the marina, because of that grassroots public support that there was, and understanding of the neighborhood's historical significance, and an interest in historic preservation. So it seemed like a natural first step to take. But we've had many requests at some of those survey respondents actually said, well, why are you stopping at Lincoln Street?
Right. I mean, that would be, because I know actually a couple of people who live on Mayflower Street
Mm-hmm.
that would like it expanded north, or west.
Right.
Instead of,
Right.
just south.
Right. And we also, there are other neighborhoods, adjacent to the existing district or in other parts of Plymouth, Whitehorse Beach, Chiltonville, North Plymouth. Those are all areas of concern in terms of development and, the loss of some of these distinct communities that make up the town of Plymouth. So that might be something that in the future we could look at, creating districts, designating those areas. But it would take, again, I think, the support of people who live in those neighborhoods and sections of town. There is a cost associated to doing this work. As I mentioned, we did hire a consultant to do the study report. We don't have anyone within town hall who is, has the time or is equipped to do this type of study. So any kind of larger neighborhood expansion would require hiring a consultant and obviously making those funds available to do so.
Okay. Although I'm sure Mr. Hartman is a great resource.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Zuccarelli, I see your digital hand. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So much of the conversation that goes into expanding this area of town in terms of the historic district is around the Foundry. I think we can all agree to that. There's another area of town just 3.5 miles north that if we're talking about preserving the historic nature of the 19th century industrial work, I feel like is being overlooked or not being talked about. So I'm wondering, hearing what you said about the cost that's involved and the grassroots support, the neighborhood support, the citizen support that's involved in this, but what is being done? And we've had conversations about this before. What is being done about preserving the area in and around North Plymouth? I mean, there was all of the conversation that surrounded the smokestack coming down, which to some was a rush to demolition. And there's also conversations about a property in Spooner Street now that does have a demolition delay. But all of these are, Band-Aids. They're not really solutions to the problem. So I'm really curious about what's being done, or even if conversations are being had in moving towards designating parts of North Plymouth, even in phases, towards historic districts.
I could say as we've gone through this process, this has been a consistent theme we've heard. We've heard it about others, but most vocally about North Plymouth. So again, as we've said, we'll see how this goes. If it works well and it gets approval, then I think the staff and the commission will be energized to look at other areas. We were very fortunate to have your support to add $25,000 a year into my budget for consulting services. That would be more than enough to start the process if we wanted to look. And again, I think we've heard loud and clear that a lot of people are concerned about the historic structures in North Plymouth. So we hear it. We'll see how this goes, and hopefully if it goes well, that might be the next focus for the commission to look at.
Mr. Zuccarelli, would you like a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Mr. Bizzarro, I see your digital hand. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Mason, thank you for your presentation. I also listened to it at the select board the other day, so familiar with it. Similar to the previous articles, my question revolves around some practice. There was a slide that talked about things that would trigger, and I think it mentioned one of the bullet points for solar panels. So walk us through how do you balance that transition, from carbon-based energy and sustainable energy policies with historic district preservation?
That's an excellent question, because that's something that the preservation community is facing. I mean, we're all facing it, but you're looking at different materials that are available, different needs based on changes to our environment that we have to address and that we have to be equipped to be prepared for. So in the case of solar panels, the guidelines currently state that the recommendation is that they be placed in such a way that they're not visible from the public way. And so obviously that it does limit what property owners can do. We have approved solar panels. I'm thinking in my time on the board, I think we've approved them once. I don't know if we haven't really had that many applications for them. But again, it was felt that they would be okay installed as they were proposed because of their location on the roof, and that they would not be visible from the main street. And so that worked for the solar installation, and they were approved. I don't know if, Mr. Tubin, you have any other examples there?
There's also the materials over the past several years have changed a lot too. They used to be, a solar panel was, this far off the roof. Now they're very low profile, black. They're not as noticeable. We have approved a few, and we do try to keep them on a non-public viewed area, but sometimes that's not possible, and we do work with people. We're not going to tell people you can't utilize solar panels. So we do, as a whole, we try to work with people and allow people to do what they're looking to do, but we try to keep it in a historic fashion, preservation as we can.
And then one other note, just in terms of the different certificates that are available, there is the certificate of hardship, which I'm trying to find if I have that slide, which is if something does not meet the guidelines as they exist, the applicant can choose to file a certificate of hardship, and that it sort of is like an exemption. So that we can say, well, for this particular property with a very small lot and they need a generator, where are they going to be able to put it except where it's visible from a public way? That could be something that would be approved under that certificate of hardship. So it's not we're not trying to rewrite the guidelines every time something pops up, but that we would be able to consider on a case-by-case basis what again would be helpful for the property owner, recognizing all the different things that go into maintaining a property and improving a property, and being prepared for any sort of climate catastrophes that may be headed our way, which again, on the waterfront, in a waterfront neighborhood, that's a very, very real and very present threat. So,
Do you have a follow-up question for us, Mr. Pizarro?
No further follow-up. Thank you, Ms. Mason and Mr. Tubin, for your answer.
Okay, any further questions? I do have a question. What specific concerns have the residents mentioned?
One that we got quite frequently was actually about window air conditioning units. And this is actually something that's allowed in the bylaws. I mean, we're not going to walk down a street in the summer and say these window air conditioning units have to come out. They're temporary. We know that in historic houses, you usually don't have central air, so having a window unit is very important. So that I think it was that sort of question, right? The question about how picky is the Historic District Commission going to be about the shade of white that I choose for my home, right? Are they going to be saying that I need it to be creamier or whiter or whatever it might be? And we really don't get into that level of detail. We do have guidelines about colors, but there's a lot of colors to choose from, and we're not trying to make someone's life really difficult. Again, to Mr. Hartman's point, we're not trying to create a Disneyland or, a Colonial Williamsburg here in Plymouth where everything is correct for one particular time period. And partly that's just the reality of Plymouth, is that, again, it's been here for over 400 years. The community has grown and changed. Building architecture has changed. Building techniques and materials have changed. So it doesn't make any sense for us to try to reverse the clock and make everything match. I remember I actually recently went to Nantucket. Nantucket had one of the first historic districts in the state of Massachusetts. And it was, if you go to Nantucket today, you can sort of imagine in your head, like, everything looks the same. And of course, it's a very wealthy community, so there's a lot of money to pour into these properties. We're not trying to make Plymouth look like that. We want to keep Plymouth with all of its different periods and styles represented, which again is unique to our history as a community.
Thank you.
One other thing too, I think what we noticed when we started with the public hearings, I think people just needed to be educated. I just think they weren't aware, as Ann alluded to. So a lot of the questions that were asked, what if I want to put a flag in front of my house? You can't tell me what to do. So a lot of people just needed to be educated on what we're about, what our guidelines are, what our requirements are. So I think we alleviated a lot. So I think the people that weren't in favor, my opinion is, I think a lot of them through education and probably more educating, I think that will be more understanding of what we do, and I don't think they'll be as against the proposal.
So guidelines from one town's historic district to another can vary. I owned a property in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia, in the historic district, and they were very picky about the color. You couldn't change the trim around your windows without going before a Board of Architectural Review, and it was quite a process for such a small change, but they were very strict about what you could and couldn't do to preserve their
and one thing
history.
we're doing too, our guidelines were put into place in 2007, and since then a lot of things have changed. New materials come on, and we try to not require people to use cedar shingles or just wood materials. We're open to different wood-like materials that might be a lower cost, might be easier for people to obtain. So we're updating the guidelines currently. We're just going to start that process. So hopefully it'll be even simpler with updated guidelines with updated materials and maybe address some of the inconsistencies or things we need to update in the guidelines.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further questions here. Mr. Pizarro, would you like to entertain a motion to approve Article 15, expand the historic district?
So moved.
Mr. Zuccarelli, would you like to second?
Yes.
Thank you so much. We have a motion on the table to approve Article 15, expand the historic district. Ms. Butler, how do you vote? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go to discussion. It's a good thing you're here. I guess just assumed there wasn't discussion. All right. Ms. Butler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Cabana?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
And Mr. Zuccarelli?
Yes.
And the Advisory and Finance Committee unanimously recommends to town meeting to approve Article 15, expand historic district. Thank you so much, Mr. Hartman and Ms. Mason and Mr. Tobin for your presentation. Okay, up next is Article 18, MBTA communities, and we're back with Mr. Hartman.
So I'm going to turn this over to our consultant, Judy Barrett from Barrett Planning Group, and let her start this, and then we'll do a bit of a tag team.
You putting the slides up, please? Judy Barrett. All set? Okay. So, good evening. It's always wonderful for me to be back in Plymouth. Always different topics and lots of fun. So, tonight we want to talk about the MBTA Communities Law, give you some background about this law, maybe make sure everybody understands what it says and what it doesn't say, and go over kind of what the efforts have been so far to get information to others in the community who would want to know about this proposal that is coming to town meeting. So I'm going to give you a little overview of the law. And if you already know all of this, I apologize, but sometimes when I go into meetings to talk about the MBTA Communities Law, I find that people don't have an even understanding of what's taken place. So in 2021, the Economic Development Bond Bill included a provision called the Housing Choice Initiative. And under the Housing Choice Initiative, the legislature established an amendment to the Zoning Act. So the Zoning Act is Chapter 40A. The amendment is Section 3A. It is a new section. And the intent of it was to open up housing development opportunities in the 177 cities and towns in eastern and central Massachusetts that are considered MBTA communities. And I'll define that for you in just a minute. The law has really three purposes. One is to address the Commonwealth's housing crisis, which I know you've already heard some about from other speakers, to encourage multifamily development and to boost the Commonwealth's housing supply. So those are the three main purposes of the statute. You've probably seen this map before. If not, it is a map of the MBTA community catchment area. We'll call it that for lack of a better phrase. And the colors on the map denote the classification of the communities that are subject to this law. The sort of semi-light greenish color that's up there, adjacent community, that is Plymouth. And many communities are in that adjacent community category. But essentially, the way to understand the map is that the darkest color, those very dark blue, those are the rapid transit communities. Those are towns that have rapid transit service, red line, green line, orange line. The greenish, the darker green communities have commuter rail service. The
the next shade up, the sort of semi-light greenish color, that's the adjacent towns. So those are towns that are next to communities that have train service. And then the lightest color up there are what we call adjacent small towns. And they tend to be low population communities that are nonetheless in the MBTA community service area. And the reason that those colors are important is that the requirements that apply to the communities in each category are a little bit different. One of which, of course, is the deadline to achieve compliance. So the basic requirements of the statute are that you allow multifamily housing as of right at a density of at least 15 units per acre. That you can't have restrictions on that housing in terms of bedrooms, number of bedrooms, or unit sizes, or age restrictions that would limit the opportunity for people to choose to live in units developed in these developments. The legislature had a preference for locating these districts within a half mile of commuter rail, subway, et cetera, where that's feasible to do. But as you already saw, the district includes many communities that don't directly have service. They're adjacent to it. The district must be of a reasonable size. The legislature did not define that. Rather, the legislature said, these are the big, broad parameters. We are now going to delegate to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities the responsibility to develop guidelines that will kind of fill in the details and help communities determine whether they comply. So some of this is in the statute, and some of it is in what I'm going to continue to refer to as the guidelines. Statute is the legislature. The guidelines are an executive branch agency. So district of reasonable size, not being defined in the statute, was left to housing and livable communities to figure out what that means. And the guidelines require either 50 acres or 1.5% of the community's developable land area. There's a minimum zoned capacity number, which relates to the size of the district. And I will explain zoned capacity in a minute, but these concepts kind of go together. The other thing that the guidelines say is at least half the district, if let's say you decide to have a district in multiple locations, at least half of it must be contiguous parcels. And no part of the district can be smaller than 5 contiguous acres. Zoned capacity is a really important concept. It's actually, in some ways, more important than the 15 units an acre. It's the number of units that your district must be designed to allow, assuming development can happen in that district. So the number of units that you're required to zone for, as of right, is this concept of zoned capacity. Plymouth's minimum requirement is 2,807 units. And so this number is arrived at by going to your Census 2020 total housing count and figuring out what 10% of it is. And that's basically where the number comes from. Did you have a question, sir?
Yeah, good. I couldn't quite see the map. So is Plymouth considered to be a commuter rail community?
No, you are an adjacent community. Yes, you're adjacent community. I apologize.
That represents then the requirement for Plymouth based on its
Exactly.
designation.
Yes, sir. Oh.
All right, sorry about that. The question was whether Plymouth is an adjacent community as opposed to a commuter rail after the closing of the Plymouth station, and
Yeah.
it's an adjacent community.
I apologize if that wasn't clear. I tend to go into this now so many times.
No,
that
I just didn't have my mic on.
Okay. Zone capacity is not limited to vacant land, as will be obvious to you when you see the proposed district locations. It is not a requirement to construct units. Many laws, such as Chapter 40B, require production. This law does not. This law is about having zoning in place to enable development. Whether construction happens is not the town's responsibility. It's not concerned with existing units. Many communities say, well, we already have a lot of housing. Can we get credit for it? Well, the best way to get credit for it, frankly, is to put your district where that housing is. And again, you're going to see that shortly. The law does not require, as I said, new housing development. It doesn't require communities to pay for the infrastructure that is needed to support growth. If a proponent chooses to go to the planning board to apply for site plan approval, to build a project that needs water service, sewer service, it's the applicant's problem to sort that out. It's not the town's responsibility. The law does not override the State Wetlands Act. It doesn't override Title V of the Massachusetts Environmental Code. And it doesn't provide for options or waivers for communities to sort of be exempt from the law. If you are an MBTA community, if you are one of those 177 communities, you're subject to the law. So there are some opportunities and limitations associated with this statute. You certainly can require applicants to go to the planning board for site plan review. You already have site plan review in Plymouth. This proposed zoning actually relies on the fact that you have an existing procedure for site plan review. And site plan review can consider things like, the adequacy of access in and out of the site, the adequacy of planned circulation within the site to protect vehicles and pedestrians, architectural design, the sufficiency of landscaping, screening of adjacent properties. These are basic site plan review considerations, and you already have that in your zoning. You may require up to 10% of the units to be affordable. For purposes of this law, affordable is not tied to the same definition that typically applies to Chapter 40B developments, which is the lower moderate income concept. I will point out, however, that communities that are requiring affordable housing, by and large, are using the Chapter 40B definition because if the units are created, they will count toward the town's 10% minimum. But I just want you to know you have some liberty as to how you define affordable. And the proposed zoning does, in fact, call for at least 10% affordable units. So the impact of noncompliance, there are two ways to think about this. One is that the legislature, in passing this law, said, if you don't comply, you're categorically ineligible for certain grants. One of which is what we call the Community One Stop for Growth, which includes programs that probably are familiar to you as Finance Committee people, known as the Mass Works Grant, which Plymouth has done extremely well with in the past. The Housing Choice Program, which is available to certain communities that are kind of high housing producing communities like Plymouth. And then the Local Capital Projects Fund, which is a fund that's important to local housing authorities. So the legislature said, if you don't comply, you can't get monies from these programs. A few months ago, Housing and Livable Communities took another step at the governor's behest, that a number of other grant programs, which are under the executive branch, would be more difficult for communities to get if they don't comply. What that means is these are grant programs that you apply to. It's at the discretion of an agency whether to award the funds, and you would lose competitiveness points if you were not in compliance with the MBTA Communities Law. The town has also gotten grants from several of these programs. And it's impossible to put on a slide what your town has managed to do with grants. It's just a very impressive track record. But just a few examples, you've had municipal vulnerability grants in terms of planning and implementation, coastal resilience funding, $1.5 million for ecological restoration, the Holmes Dam, Wareham Road, Loring Road, the seawall, and many, many other grants. To try to help people prepare for having to make the decision that will be coming before town meeting, we had some public meetings in the fall. Lee Hartman and I did 2 meetings, August and September, public information meetings, just largely like what you're hearing now. And then in October, Lee and one of my colleagues from Barrett Planning Group met at a joint meeting of the Planning Board and the Select Board to try to get some direction, because at the Planning Department's request, we had looked at several different locations in town that might make sense for a district that would comply with the MBTA community zoning. And those were a variety of locations. Some had existing developments, some were vacant land. There was an attempt to try to look at a variety of scenarios. We have, as part of our obligation to the town, a responsibility to analyze those areas for whether they will comply with the law. And we had done that. So Lee Hartman and I went and did these presentations around, these are different locations in town. In August and September, people who attended those meetings, we kind of asked, what do you think? Lee and my colleague went to that joint meeting to try to get direction. And as a result of that joint meeting, we had kind of our marching orders for the locations that the Planning Board and Select Board thought we should look at. And there's information about all of this on the town website, just so you know. I think an effort really has been made to try to make sure that people knew what was going on. So there was an analysis process involved here. It wasn't just looking at sites and saying, boy, that might be a cool place to do this. As part of the Housing and Livable Communities Guidelines, there is a model that we have to use. It's a computer model to look at areas that a town is considering. And the model requires two types of technology. One is geographic information systems, mapping, and the other is simply Excel. And so once you kind of identify the parcels you want to study, then in this very elaborate, really complicated Excel model that was developed by a consultant to the state, we have to look at those parcels and figure out, can you get 15 units an acre out of this? Can you get to the zoned capacity number? Because you're going to lose some land. The model discounts things like wetlands. It doesn't allow you to count municipally owned property. It doesn't allow you to count institutional property like a hospital. So a lot of land comes out of this sort of gross sum of the acreage and parcels. And you have to then figure out, once you take all that land out, do you actually have 2,807 units if you look at these different districts? So we did that work, and we knew that there were any number of configurations that would get the town to that number. The question was, what do you want to do? So we were able to determine that we could reach zoned capacity here, looking at sort of the gross acreage in these parcels, taking out the land we couldn't count, making some assumptions, inputs into the model. How tall would these buildings be? How many parking spaces per unit might one require? What's the maximum lot coverage? And a few other things depending upon what your own zoning say. All these were sort of input into the model for all these different properties to try to figure out what would work. And out of that came those 7 or 8 sites, which were whittled down in October. And I'm going to refer the rest of this to Lee because he knows these properties so much better than I do.
So before you go, could you just mention how many communities you're assisting through this one process?
Oh, Lord. We just had a meeting about this today. We're working with about 20 communities. And they're all different. Just to tell you that, they're all different. I'm done. You speak.
So again, as Judy pointed out, and thank you, Judy, for that, we had a joint meeting after the public forums with the Planning Board and Select Board, and when we talked about possibly where we could do this, there were options to create more housing, options not to. The direction we clearly got from the public forums, from the Select Board, and from the Planning Board was to essentially take credit for the multifamily that we've already had occurring in this town. And I can tell you, from my standpoint, it's borderline frightening how much new multifamily development we've seen in this town over the last 2 or 3 years. It's been phenomenal. So again, the direction we had was let's take credit for what's there now and focus as much as possible the area to the northern part of town. So the first area that we've identified and we're recommending for town meeting is Cottage Park. And so as we look at this, make sure I figure this one out. Okay, there we go. So as we look at Cottage Park, so this is Route 3A, so this is Kingston Town Line. This is Route 3A that goes through from Kingston down towards downtown Plymouth. These are the new multifamily development in Cottage Park right here. This is the new building with the mural on it. All of the commercial area is not included, so this is just where the residential is and where the new residential is proposed in the future. And what I would point out is this is also called a 40R Smart Growth District. So this site and these areas that are in this zone are already permitted or constructed for 675 units. So again, this is an area where we will see, one way or another, 675 units. It's an area we're taking credit for the development that either exists or will occur because it's already been approved. The second one is the area of Sawyer's Reach. The new Walk 40B, which is behind, so we have Dick's Sporting Goods over here, the Walmart over here. This is Plimpton Road. This is Commerce Way heading out to Route 44, town of Kingston, Kingston Town Line. So again, if you look, you have the hotels over here, you have Taco Bell and some of those restaurants here. And so this is that area behind where you have the multifamily Sawyer's Reach, and you also have the Oasis here, and then the Claremont property, which has been approved already for a 55 and older project. The next one is the Oasis. I hate that name. But the Oasis off of Home Depot Road. So this is Route 3, South Street heading towards downtown, Long Pond Road heading out towards either PCIS. The police station is right here. Home Depot is right here, so this is Home Depot Drive, and this is the already constructed Oasis development. I should point out, too, that's 320 units in that, and that's a 40B project. And then the last one is to take credit for the multifamily that occurs at the Pine Hills. So again, Route 3, this is the exit for, I don't even know what we call it now, exit 13, no, it can't be 13, exit 7. Exit 7, formerly exit 3. And this is Clark Road, first entrance, the fire station in the Pine Hills is here, first entrance, second entrance, and the third entrance, Merbeau is over here. So this is the Avalon development that has existed for another number of years. This is the Mark that has also existed. This is the new Hanover development that just has been built, and this is the Brizzuto property right on the Village Green. So again, trying to take credit for the development that has already been constructed. I will say, again, with the direction we've had from the community, I expect really no additional development, no additional impacts on the community by doing this. I also want to point out and really reiterate that this is a mandatory. And so in addition to the punishments or the lack of grants that Judy has pointed out, we could face legal action. The Attorney General has said towns who refuse to comply may face legal action. We've seen other parties threaten or have lawsuits in other communities. So in addition to losing all those grant opportunities, there is the threat of legal action by the state against us if we don't comply. So we proposed and we put together a model. You have the bylaw, you have the map before you. What we're looking to do is create something that addresses and essentially takes credit for the development we've already had in the town and address the requirements of the MBTA. And then this just shows how we comply with the model to have over capacity of over 2,807 units. So it's 4 districts. This is an overlay, so it doesn't change anything that's underneath. The underneath zoning already also applies. Each of those 4 districts have slightly different standards that you see in the bylaw, but they do set up basic standards for any of the parking requirements, those types of things. Town Council has reviewed this bylaw too and has approved it. And then I would just point out this has been supported unanimously, or 4-0 by the Planning Board and unanimously by the Select Board. So, and we hope you support this too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hartman. I do have one question off the bat. What is the date that we must be in compliance?
So the date is January of next year. So, okay, so one day before.
So we're 11 months away from the deadline.
So the concern here is the reason we want to do this and bring it in for April. If this, for some reason, is not successful, we have a second chance to try to do something that fall. But again, I think we put together a great package that will address the concerns. There's also an issue that maybe the Attorney General or the state doesn't like something we did, so it could give us another cut if somebody looks at this. And we feel very confident we have something that complies, but you never know until you submit it.
Thank you. Mr. Howard, your digital hand is up. You have the floor.
Good evening. You had mentioned that there were 7 areas under consideration. What are the other areas? And I was particularly concerned about Red Brook, if you could address that.
Yeah, so we had identified Red Brook, again, because we didn't know how many units. We looked at Red Brook where, again, only where the existing multifamily has already occurred. the apartment complexes there. We looked at the Market Basket site. We looked at the T.L. Edwards site, former PA Landers, off of the, I always have to say it, even though it's 20 years old, the new Route 44 that has existed for 20 years. Let's see, what else did we look at for sites? And then we looked at the old Stop and Shop, and again, I'm showing my age, at the Kingston Town Line, the little old plaza that straddles the Plymouth Kingston Town Line. We looked at that site too. I think those were the sites.
Thank you. No follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Any further questions for Mr. Hartman or Ms. Barrett? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Mr. Lally, would you like to move to approve Article 18, MBTA Communities?
I move to approve Article 18 as presented.
Thank you so much. Mr. Howard, would you like to second that, please?
A second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to approve Article 18, MBTA Communities. Do we have any discussion? Mr. Lally, the floor
First,
is yours.
I want to recognize this is great work, beyond great. And I think as advisory and finance committees, as we make our rounds for our caucus assignments, we really need to make a point of talking about what a good piece of work this is and how important it is that the town passes, because I think the bar is 2/3, right? So that's a high bar. But I think, so anyway, I just want to congratulate you on that work.
Thank you.
Agreed. Mr. Green, you're flinching. Okay, anybody else in discussion? I think the presentation answered all of our questions, so I would have to say well done there. Okay, so we have a motion to approve Article 18, MBTA Communities. Ms. Butler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Cabana?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes?
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Bizzarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
And Mr. Zuccaroli?
Yes.
And the Advisory and Finance Committee unanimously approves to recommend to town meeting the approval of Article 18 by a vote of 12-0.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Lee, I think it would be really swell if we could get a copy of that presentation just as a reference.
Sure. I think I already have it on the web, but do you want want me to print out
No.
copies?
If it's on the web, I'll look for it. Thank you.
I'll make sure of that tomorrow morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's up there might be slightly different, but so I'll make sure it's up first thing in the morning.
Okay, moving on to Article 19. And if you're just joining us, we are in the January 31st Advisory and Finance Committee meeting of the Town of Plymouth. Welcome to our meeting. We are now addressing Article 19, amending Chapter 90, Section E, Historically Significant Buildings. Mr. Hartman, would you like to talk, or Mr. Tubin?
I will do this one. And I think this is a fairly simple one. So a number of years ago, town meeting adopted the demolition delay bylaw. You heard a little discussion about that. It allows, if the commission determines a building to be historically significant, a one-year period to allow for, to say it's significant and not allow it to be demolished, and gives a year to hopefully maybe work out some kind of alternative to demolition. It's a great bylaw. It's been used. It works well. What we're finding is just one mechanical piece of this. The initial bylaw said that when you file with the board, the commission, that within 14 days they have to decide whether or not to hold a public hearing and determine if it's significant. So that they meet twice a month. That 14-day timeline is very difficult. So all they're looking to do is go from 14 days to 21 days. So they will have 21 days now instead of 14, where they look at it and say, no, you can go ahead and demolish. It's not historically significant. Or yes, it is. We want to hold a public hearing. And then there'd be a second phase of the public hearing. So what I would say is that 21 days gives them the ability to make a better decision and not forced to make a quick decision. So I think it works for the property owner as well as the town, just to make sure that this is well thought out and the decision is made properly and they're not being rushed to make that decision. So again, just 7 days extra for that initial decision.
And that sounds reasonable and logical, to me anyway. Okay, any questions for Mr. Hartman? I didn't think so. Mr. Dunn, would you like to move to approve Article 19, amend Chapter 90, Section E, Historical Significant Buildings?
So moved.
And Mr. Cabana, would you like to second that motion, please?
Yes, I would. Seconded.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have a motion on the table to approve Article 19. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, we will go to the vote. Ms. Butler, how do you vote on Article 19?
Yes.
Mr. Cabana?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Bizzarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
And Mr. Zuparoli?
Yes.
The Advisory and Finance Committee recommends to Town Council to approve Article 19, amend Chapter 90, Section E, Historically Significant Buildings. And I thank you again, Mr. Hartman, for that very succinct presentation. Okay, that brings up our last article of the day. It's so sad that we're so close to finishing this meeting, but it's Article 21. It's to amend the zoning bylaw, Section 20711, ground-mounted solar photovoltaic systems. We actually had a long discussion about this issue in our fall meeting, so we should be fairly up on what photovoltaic is. But I'm going to turn this meeting over to Mark Pacheco, who is a private citizen, and if you could identify yourself for the record, your name and address. Thank you.
This is very much the same as what you saw in the fall. However, the language has changed. Do I have to identify myself again? Or?
Yeah, no, I think we got it.
Good.
Thank you.
The language has changed, it's streamlined, and since that time, we've received unanimous recommendations from the Energy Committee, from the Planning Board, and just last night from the Board of Selectmen. So I'm just going to jump right in. It makes two changes to existing language and adds a new section. The first change to existing language deals with the bond issue. Right now, the bond is based on 2 megawatts or over. It strikes me that that's technology, and that can change. That's not really what the bond is for. The bond is for something that's quite large, and we don't want it sitting there. So we've changed the language from 2 megawatts to 4 acres. 4 acres in conversations with planning it made sense. If you want to visualize that, 2 acres, 4 acres is about a Walmart supercenter. Next change, we had asked for a change for notification to 700 feet last time. This time, what we're doing is we're asking for an additional language that encourages developers when there are people that are likely to be impacted but outside of the 300-foot range, that they also be notified. It signals to these developers that we're serious about protecting our residents while in no way trying to stop solar development. The last change is a new section. It's entitled Standards and Conditions. This is where previously we had the term viewshed, and we've done away with that. And the new direction we're going in really relies on existing language. The existing language right now for this bylaw under the intent speaks to minimizing the impacts of solar facilities on characters of neighborhoods, on property values, on the scenic, historic, and environmental resources of the town, et cetera, et cetera. So those impacts that we want to protect residents from are already outlined. Therefore, under the Standards and Conditions section, we're simply saying an applicant shall present to the town for planning board review and recommendation a stamped engineered plan which includes screening as defined by section 2013 of the bylaw, which accomplishes the goal of largely minimizing the impacts of solar facilities on surrounding residential properties. Where there are no impacts, they don't have to do this. Where there are, they do. The impacts are already outlined. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're taking the screening section and the intent section, we're marrying them together and putting the onus on developers in a new section. The planning board then must present, following inspection of special services, they must vote on a plan that has screening. The last thing is, some of you may remember, there was a concern that there was no severability clause. We've added that to this. So I'd be happy to take your questions.
Excellent.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Patrick, would you like to speak now? Or?
Yeah.
Go ahead. The floor is yours. And
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Good evening. For the record, my name is Patrick Farrar, planning staff
thank you.
and energy officer. So if some of you may remember at Fall Town Meeting, I think it was Article 24, failed by 3 votes. And subsequent to that Fall Town Meeting, staff reached out to the petitioner. And Mark Pacheco is actually the consultant for the homeowners who want to see some changes in 20711. And Mr. Pacheco and I, we actually met several times, went line by line through the bylaw to create a more understandable, provide more clarity to the planning board, and not creating like more teeth, so to speak, but a better understanding for all parties, whether you're the petitioner or you are the potentially impacted resident abutting a potential project. With that said, all the language that was changed, we as staff have no objection to this change of legislation, potentially, if it does pass through town meeting. And also want to let the committee know that the Energy Committee reviewed the language, unanimously voted in favor of supporting this, and actually drafted a letter of support, which you may or may not have in your packet. And we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrar. Opening it up to questions, Mr. Zuccaroli, I see your digital hand. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So the part of the language of this reads that this does not carry the force of law with it. If it does not carry the force of law, why do we need this?
What we're trying to do is ensure that a developer understands that we're serious about protecting residents' rights. Now, the previous incarnation of this had set this at 700 feet. The issue with that for a lot of people was that, well, if we do it for solar, why don't we do it for a mall, for example, which is understandable. But these are massive projects. And so we want to get some language in that ensures that they're thinking the same way we're thinking. And this language was put together with the help of Mr. Farrar. I think you believe, somewhat that developers will see this and will understand and will go forth and do it. But doing it as force of law, I think, opens up the can of worms of why aren't we doing it for other issues.
Mr. Zuccaroli, would you like a follow-up?
I do have one other follow-up. So who exactly is asking for this?
Well, I am one of the petitioners. I have a company, 513 Consulting, was hired by several residents out on Black Cat Road. I believe in it enough that I put my name on it as well, so I'm asking for it.
I believe that would be a citizen's petition. Is
Yep.
that what we would call that? Mr. Zuccaroli, would you like another follow-up?
I have no other questions.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions for Mr. Pacheco or Mr. Farrar? No. Seeing and hearing none. Let's see. Mr. Lawler, you've been awfully quiet tonight. Did the cat get your tongue? No. Better give it back. Could you give us a motion to approve Article 21?
Motion to approve Article 21, please.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Richards, sitting next to him, would you like to second that, please?
I will happily second that motion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have a motion on the table to approve Article 21. Do we have any discussion amongst ourselves? Mr. Howard, your digital hand is up. The floor is yours.
I like these changes. I fully support this article.
Thank you. Any other comments and discussion? Yes, Ms. Richards, the floor is yours.
So I remember this coming before us last fall, and I supported it then, and I will support it now. I think it's a great idea, and with the additions, I hope it passes town meeting, and you have my full support. Thank you, and I hope my fellow members on the Advisory and Finance Committee agree. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Lally, the floor is yours.
I voted against this last fall, but I will vote for it because of the changes that, the concerns that I had last fall have been addressed by these amendments, so thank you.
Well, they must have been listening. Any other discussion? Hearing and seeing none. We have a motion to approve Article 21. Ms. Butler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Cabana?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Bizzarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Zuccaroli?
Abstain.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends to town meeting to approve Article 21, amend zoning bylaw 207-11 by a vote of 11 for, 0 against, and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you so much for all of your hard work and great presentations. Much appreciated. And is there any old, new, or other business that anybody would like to bring up? Mr. Howard.
Thank you. Under the category of new business, given the size of this committee, I suggest that as a working guideline,
Okay,
that
could I just
we
interrupt for a
agree
quick-
that
Could I interrupt for a quick second? Because we just got
Yes.
2 new members. Does that change what you're about to say?
no, sir.
Sorry?
No, sir, it does
Oh.
not change.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were referring to our being at 13 members. My apologies.
No, that I'm welcome new members. So as a matter of courtesy to all of us on the committee and to our speakers, I would suggest as a working guideline that we limit each of our own questions and comments to 2 questions or comments at a time, and then pass the floor to others that may have questions or comments. It will encourage us to be succinct and to raise our most important questions and comments first. And then if we have additional questions or comments after all of the committee members have had a chance to speak, that they could then be given additional time.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you for your comment. Any other new, old, or other business? Okay. Seeing and hearing none, could I get a motion from anybody here to adjourn? Oh, sorry. Got to go to the public. Sorry. That's great. The floor is yours. Thank you for making it, sir. I'm so sorry. And there's... Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Kate Sakarik. I live at 26 Bradford Street. I am in full support of the historic expansion, and I thank you all for also joining me in that support. I just wanted to make a couple of other points that weren't made earlier. And those were that the concerns that you saw, first of all, that survey was done. That was the first point of order. The concerns that were brought up by myself and my neighbors were generally two things. One was, sort of a mischaracterization or simplification about rules and regulations. Can I have this? Can I have that? Colors, etc. The other main concern is that we don't want to have the historic district proposal shrunken in any way, meaning that we want to make sure that the big three, as we call them, meaning the yacht club, the marina, and the municipal buildings, are not allowed to somehow, sneak out of this, at town meeting in the 11th hour. That's important because we are afraid of that kind of threat to the neighborhood. I'm really not concerned about, my neighbor's air conditioner. I love my neighbors. I know that my house is important. I had a group from the Vernacular Architectural Forum come to visit my house twice last spring and summer. They were fascinated by, what was still remaining of a worker's cottage, and they were thrilled that they were given access, and I've never had so many people interested in my cellar. And so knowing all of this, one of the main concerns, and because of, yes, what happened with the marina, is that, we feel like if the town needed money, and wanted to, close the school and sell to a developer, that's all fine and well, but, that developer, take the Nathaniel Morton Elementary and, not raise it and build us, Pine Hills in the backside of our street. So we just want to make sure that this stays intact is really, because I know that some of you are also part of town meeting and precinct members, and so you'll see me again at your meetings, but that was just something that I wanted to make clear. But I'm thrilled that you're behind us, and I hope that this passes. And thank you. Good night. You can adjourn.
Thank you for staying here throughout the entire meeting, and we appreciate your comments. Would you like to make a motion? All right. The floor is open for anybody who would like to make a motion to adjourn. So Ms. Butler has made a motion. Do I have a second on that motion? Mr. Lally, if you enthusiastically seconds that motion. Is there any discussion? No. There is no discussion. Let's take the vote to adjourn. Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Cabana?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Lally?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
Mr. Bizzarro?
Yes.
Ms. Richards?
Yes.
Ms. Tompkins?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
And Mr. Zuccaroli?
Yes.
Unanimous recommendation for this committee to adjourn, and it is, what time is it? 9:07.